my original topic was going to be something to do with molecular biology and something to do with aviation, because I love one of my two favorite fields, which is aviation and medicine. Wasn't able to find the paper that was written in English, so I settled for something that's actually been a topic of interest to me for a long time. This is a topic that I've had a significant amount of experience with. What we're going to talk about today in this paper is, as a whole, depression. We're going to look at a real specific part and some research that was done on a couple of drugs, one drug in particular. A little bit of where we're going, because I always seem to get lost. I'm going to give a little bit of a brief background on depression and anxiety disorder, what it is, why it's important, how it's being treated now. There's some current questions in the topic that I feel need to be addressed before we dig into this paper, and we'll kind of address some of the theories that go along with that. We'll get into the paper. We'll discuss what specifically was researched and why, and what some of the implications are after that. And there's some definite questions that arise from this paper. So, depression, anxiety disorders are becoming ever more prevalent in civilized, or I suppose Western countries. They have a significant societal impact, and I think that's lost on a lot of people, especially like people who don't have these disorders or don't see them every day. The effects of these disorders on a patient are numerous, and they can range from, mildly feeling the blues and being a little bit less productive in society to the extreme, which as extreme as I can imagine is full-blown suicide or self-destruction. Some of the current statistics out there, CDC in 2006 released a study, and it was basically just a phone call interview, which we all should know aren't that accurate, but it basically said over 1 in 20 Americans are reported to have current depression as of 2006. Current estimates from the Anxiety and Depression Association of America have statistics that are closer to 1 in 5 suffer from some depressive or anxiety disorder. Close to 1 in 10 have some sort of major depressive episode at some point in their lives. The current method for treating these disorders is the use of antidepressants. Many of these drugs have been shown to have a significant positive impact on a patient. They've been shown to, not only improving mood, but improving relationship building, improving neuroplasticity, stuff like that. Sorry, I lost myself. Also a big decrease in antisocial behavior, which is one of the things that we're trying to alleviate here. However, and there's a big however, this meme seems to capture my next big point that I keep finding in a lot of the times I read about this topic is how much we really don't know, despite how much research is being done, despite how much we know about human physiology, medicine, psychiatry, psychology. There's a lot of stuff that is not known about depression. What causes it specifically? How are these SSRIs or other antidepressants actually working on the molecular level? And what are they affecting also? Two of the major theories that have the most weight among researchers right now are that decreased levels of serotonin in the central nervous system leads to negative impacts on mood and several other side effects, or several other areas of the human psyche. And the exact opposite of that too, where higher levels of serotonin lead to a more positive mood. And this second one is a little bit more in line with what our paper is going to talk about, or one of the major points, and this is where a lot of controversy is right now among the scientific community, is that decreased neurogenesis in some studies has been shown to have a negative impact on depression as well, or negative impact on mood. It's supposed to be a little bit more appropriate. There's tons of studies out there linking neurogenesis, the growth of new nerves and new neural pathways, to depression. If you decrease the amount of nerves being produced, especially in the hippocampal area of the brain, it's been shown quite a bit to have an effect on mood and depression and anxiety disorders. Many antidepressants, including the SSRIs that we're going to talk about today, have been observed to alter both levels of serotonin in the central nervous system and neurogenesis in the central nervous system, which leaves a big question every time I find a new paper of what the hell is more important. Is increasing neurogenesis more important? Is increasing serotonin more important? Can they function independent of each other? Are they dependent on each other? Chicken and the egg, which one comes first, which was more important? These are questions that need to be answered in the research. And this is where a paper comes in. A team of researchers at Duke decided to explore the effects of treatment with SSRIs to answer, or to try to answer anyway, whether neurogenesis or serotonin levels are more important. Also, can one function without the other? So the experiment was to take a genetically engineered mouse line. They used a knock-in, and for those of you who haven't had one to their bio, they targeted a specific gene and inserted into this mouse's genome, which was the tryptophan hydrolase 2, or a mutated version thereof, which is the gene that creates serotonin. And the mouse was identified as the TPH2AI mouse. Trying to not be dyslexic here. Anyway, these mutated mice had brain serotonin reduction of roughly 60 to 80% when compared to the wild. The specific drug that they decided to look at was an SSRI called fluoxetine. I'm probably not pronouncing that right. It's more commonly used throughout this paper as FLX. For the rest of us who have actually heard of Prozac, it's the same. Prozac was administered to the mutated mice and to the control for roughly a period of 4 weeks. Behavioral testing was done after the 3rd week. The dosage was equivalent to about 20 milligrams per day per kilogram on mice, which is a huge dosage on these mice. So basically they wanted to really see the effects if there were any. The test that they decided to use to judge both neurogenesis and serotonin, and also trying to look at the overall anxiety effects and depressive effects on these mice. They used the novelty suppressed feeding test and the tail suspension test. I feel like I should give an explanation on these because I read through the paper and had no idea what they were. I did quite a bit of research. The novelty suppressed feeding is basically they put a mouse in a stressful environment and they have food openly sitting out, and when the mouse calms down far enough to where he actually feels comfortable enough to go and eat, they'll time that period. And the faster he feels comfortable enough to eat, usually the less stress he is, and we can assume the less depressed he is or the less anxious he is. The tail suspension test is similar, where we tape a mouse a few inches above the lab bench and basically time how long it takes for him to quit struggling, and then eventually he'll just hang there in free space. We'll time that, and it seems kind of depressing to me reading about this. We're wanting the mouse to give up, and I'm like, oh, okay, bird has me by the tail now, and I'm just going to die, so screw it. Next. There's a lot of stuff going on in these slides, so forgive me for only going to look at a few things. This part represents basically what we introduced with. These are the genetically mutated mice, and these are the serotonin levels in the hippocampal region that they decided to look at. As you can see, they have a significant decrease in serotonin levels. The blacks are the control, the whites are with the administration of Prozac. Some of the interesting things about this were, although Prozac did increase serotonin levels in the mutated mice, almost to the point of wild-type control, it significantly increased serotonin levels in the wild-type mice, which we can expect. You give a drug to somebody who doesn't have a deficiency, all of a sudden their levels are going to go out of whack. The weird thing that I thought was in the feeding test, Prozac didn't seem to help them at all. Some of the other tests that they decided to do were to give these mice an injection of basically a marker, a nucleotide marker that they could later go in and fluoresce to check for This is showing, really briefly, just particular areas of neurogenesis going on in some of the mice. Some of the more interesting, sorry. So anyway, once again, a lot going on, and trying to ignore most of it because it confuses me too. Two of the areas that we need to look at the most are right here, A and B. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor, mRNA, and Krebs mRNA. These are two things that are going to be in quite a bit of an abundance if there's ongoing neurogenesis going on inside the mice. As they're looking at this, we can immediately see that the drug isn't really having an effect on the mutated mice, which tells us something else is, or tells me anyway, that something else is going on, since we're not seeing an increase in neurogenesis. If we look at the immunofluorescence that they did with the markers, you can basically see in E and F real quickly that there's not a lot of difference between the control and the actual test in the mutated mice as far as where neurogenesis, or how much neurogenesis is going on. What's this all mean? Serotonin deficiencies, from what we're seeing in this, definitely have an impact on the efficacy of certain SSRIs, Prozac in this case. This research definitely points towards this could be significant for other SSRIs as well. This is from a reduction in extracellular serotonin, which is likely blocking downstream elements that leads to neurogenesis. However, if you continue to read the paper, it was a little bit confusing for me. They decided to administer from other previous hypotheses, they decided to administer a serotonin precursor into some of the mice, both in the mutated ones, both in the mutated mice and in the control mice. This actually led to super physiological levels of serotonin and actually reduced their anxiety and depression as shown by the tests. What can we pull away from this? Studies showed that co-administration of serotonin precursor along with Prozac can basically eliminate the effects of serotonin deficiency. And for patients who possibly have a serotonin deficiency, maybe we could give them a serotonin precursor to help these SSRIs actually work instead of just, handing them pill after pill after pill, hoping something would work. They still didn't see neurogenesis in the mutated mice, even with the co-administration of a serotonin precursor. This is good because it points to the fact that, well, we don't really need to stimulate neurogenesis in order to have antidepressant effects, which actually counteracts quite a bit of evidence that I kept finding on the need for neurogenesis and antidepressant effects. The problem is, mouse model isn't perfect, but again, no animal model really is perfect. It's really only a representation for a serotonin deficiency in these mice, and not necessarily a model for depression or anxiety. We proved that we can increase serotonin, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're happy. But this is still probably about as close as you can get as far as an experimental model that I can think of. There's still a large debate on the importance of neurogenesis and mood disorders, and several of the papers that I've read completely contradict a lot of the evidence found here, and the research is absolutely needed here. One of the big problems that a few of the people that I talked to and myself came to the conclusion was if we started administering serotonin precursors along with an SSRI to induce a super physiological level of serotonin, would there be a threat of serotonin syndrome, which, if you know anything about depression, can lead to even more manic behavior and even more of a threat to the patient. So, what the hell did I just talk about? Give a brief description of depression, what it is, why it's significantly important, how it's currently being treated, and a bunch of the questions that have given rise to the topic of this paper, some of the current theories that researchers have right now on depression and what causes it. Went into our paper today and discussed the implications of this research. One of the papers I found absolutely interesting was a paper done, or a study done on the NF-kappa B family of proteins in mediated regulation of adult hippocampal neurogenesis, why that's relevant to mood disorders and antidepressant activity, which
thanks for going through that data clearly. I mean, I think you hit the important points that the authors are trying to make. I didn't see, reading the paper, and maybe I missed it, but, and so maybe you can brief me on references that they use. What about serotonin precursors alone? Is that used clinically? Has that been tested on mice? In this induced model, which is obviously artificial, does that alone seem to resolve some of the issues, or do we need an SSRI to?
Actually, I couldn't find anything specifically on administering serotonin precursors alone. That seems to me like it would be needed as a control for this experiment, and I don't think it was, as far as I could read. But I haven't found any additional information on either.
Okay.
But I think that definitely would have been needed as an additional control for this experiment. Anybody else?
Do they have drugs that they know affect neurogenesis at all?
Actually, most of the SSRIs currently being used as antidepressants seem to exhibit some positive neurogenic ability. I think the problem that they're trying to address here is, well, why and is it significant to treating depression?
Because they didn't seem to see it in their model at all.
No. They saw it in, they did see it in the wild type mice, but not in the mutant mice. And then it kept going in around, okay, well, does it mean something or does it not? I think there's something else that's being inhibited or perhaps promoted here.
Okay. Was there any data on what happened after cessation of drug administration?
No, because they killed the mice so they could do immunofluorescence.
Oh, and what did they find? Were their brains different?
They kind of went back to my previous slides with all the pretty colors.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
This is what they were finding was basically neurogenesis, one, wasn't inhibited by, or I suppose baseline neurogenesis was not inhibited by the mutated gene, but with administration of the drug, it wasn't changing either.
So in the current model, addressing whether neurogenesis is important for these mood disorders, is neurogenesis bad? Like if you have
neurogenesis is good.
Okay.
From everything I read, it's like making new friends, making new neurons and neural pathways is definitely going to improve your mood. And it kind of goes back, the novelty suppressed feeding test kind of piqued my interest a little bit with the fact that, okay, if you're unfamiliar with an environment, you're learning, you're in the process of learning whether this environment is going to be safe for you to eat in the case of this test. So there's definitely going to be either more neural pathways created or perhaps even more neurons created in the hippocampal region. So it seems like all the evidence is pointing towards if there's an increase in neurogenesis, there's going to be a better mood in the patient. If that answers your question.
Yeah, it just seemed the study here shows that the neurogenesis is increased in these knockout mice, or knock-in mice rather. So I was
it's if you read the caption on the bottom of that, because I looked at that too. If you look at the caption on the bottom of this diagram, it actually says that it did increase, but it didn't reach statistical significance. So it raises a lot of questions. Excuse me. It definitely raises a lot of questions. I think more research needs to be done independently of these two subjects, and also need to bring them both together, which one's more important. But I think we need to find, we've been, from personal experience, how we're currently dealing with depression is not ideal, in my opinion. We hand antidepressants out like candy, especially to little kids, when we don't know a whole lot about it. We know that in right now, the current method of dealing with that is, oh, let's just try a new one, let's try a new one, let's try a new one.
So is there like an underlying one common thing that you can point to at a molecular level that will say whether or not, if you could diagnose somebody with a mood disorder? I know you mentioned the serotonin levels and that there's a lack of serotonin associated with it, but is there a molecular way you could go in and say this person has this mood disorder and they need this drug?
Honestly, I think that the biggest indicator that we know of right now would be a lack of serotonin, or a decreased level of serotonin among the average. Whether that's the only thing, I think that's the best way to know.
They don't test for that, right?
No,
When
they
it's
don't.
you have depression, you don't.
No, they don't. Right now, the current way of dealing with it is basically just talking to someone, you get referred to a psychiatrist or a GP or something, hey, I don't feel that well, I want you to try this. I don't think that's a real good way to be approaching this.
Well, I guess to answer Dr. Blankenship's question, to test, I mean, what we're looking for is levels of, correct me if I'm wrong, extracellular serotonin.
Yes.
And so really the only way to do that is a brain biopsy, which I'm less willing to do. And so I guess the question is also, is there a marker for that? And which goes back to Jerome's point, what's the molecular marker that might be present in the blood consistently, or what brain imaging with regards to neurogenesis can we determine? And I think your answer to all of that is there is none. It's
Right now, anyway.
it's a clinical diagnosis made solely by observation and self-reporting of symptoms that seem to add up to a mood disorder.
Although there are pretty interesting genetic studies out there, and I'm not sure how much it goes towards depression, but different mental issues that have very similar genetic bases. You have one family which has mutations, and each family member gets something slightly different. And it's possible that we're treating them wrong because we're treating each as a different issue with different drugs, but perhaps these individuals would all benefit from the same drug and problem solved.
And that's kind of one of the issues I have with the current method of dealing with it is we seem to be treating the symptom of whatever's going on rather than hitting it at the base of this.
I have another question. I'm going to open it up to any neurobiologist who knows the answer.
It's full of them.
Do species other than humans get depression?
I know dogs do, or at least I've been told. I would assume, yeah.
Yeah, they treat dogs with antidepressants.
I know that they treat them with antidepressants.
It doesn't necessarily.
Again, it's interesting, when we talked about like diagnostic markers and stuff too, there's often a lot of confusion, and you made a good point while you were presenting, where you're not treating a serotonin deficiency, and again, it's a difference between doing research and being a clinician, and it depends on how you want to approach it, but if you're a clinician and someone comes in and tries to tell you that they're depressed, and you say like, well, let's do a biopsy and check out
And they get
it's not
more
good. But so I mean, when you're asking about diagnostic markers too, I was thinking, well, no, it's the DSM. Is it DSM-10?
5.
Five.
5? Yeah. They
Yeah.
go backwards?
It's,
No, it
it's,
was before.
yeah, it's fine.
Oh, okay.
You're thinking of the ICD-10 codes.
Oh,
That's
okay.
what's going on.
Anyway.
When you're clinically diagnosing somebody with a mood disorder or an anxiety disorder, aren't you trying to figure out which are they deficient in serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine? Like what kind of interaction you want to?
Well, they all actually,
They all work together, but
They all work
do
together.
certain classes of the drugs they use to treat depression currently kind of target one side of that?
yeah.
Because like I've seen somebody, I had a friend of mine who came to me after she got put on medication, and when she sat down with her clinician, she gave her the diagram they kind of have set up, and they're trying to find that magical balance of serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine in your system. They have drugs they know will tweak with either which
Yes.
one. They're trying to find kind of what works for you, so if you get on it, and they adjust it accordingly. So I mean, it's kind of like are we trying to kind of figure out what, is that the current theory is there's obviously an imbalance?
It's
And
kind
how
of a
to-
trial and error thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Davis, but serotonin actually works to, along with being a neurotransmitter itself, works in conjunction with norepinephrine and some of the other neurotransmitters and stimulates their release, I suppose. So if there's low serotonin, there's going to be also a lack of norepinephrine.
Of course, I know, just, they kind of made it sound like it's kind of a package deal, and you kind of just gotta make sure you have enough of each. You're kind of trying to play with all the different, yeah.
Well, I know there's a
Sounded
drug,
all very intermittent.
I think they're called MOIs,
Monoamine
Yeah,
oxidase
they-
inhibitors,
They
MAOIs.
treat all three of those things, but they're really restrictive because people can't have some enzyme when they're taking it. You can't have like beer or
There's
any.
dangerous
Yeah,
interactions with
there's, so a lot of people don't take them, but it treats all those three, norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin, and they're really effective.
And I kind of touched on it here too. If you increase serotonin levels to super physiological levels, like that's equally dangerous too. That's injecting somebody with norepinephrine.
Thus
There's
the
a new
antidepressant.
drug, there's a new antidepressant that is being used clinically. The brand name is called it's Vibrid. I can't remember what the actual chemical name is. I believe it's called an SNRI. It's like the first of its class at all, but I believe that it works off of serotonin and norepinephrine. But I don't want to say anything else because I don't know very much about it.
I think there are other drugs on the market right now already, like I think Cymbalta is an SNRI and SSRI.
And those are, I'm not sure if it is or not. Someone with a computer will look it up.
It's called Vibrid.
Sounds like a street drug.
It's some big pharma company owns it because it's every single office that I've checked in, there's been
So,
people in trying to sell it.
I don't know if you mentioned the statistics, but how many people in the United States will deal or be diagnosed, I should say, be diagnosed with, say, major depressive disorder?
Be diagnosed with?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. The statistic from the ADAA was that 1 in 10 will develop some major depressive episode at some point in their life. Personally, I think the statistic is a lot higher, or maybe it's just the people I hang out with. But it's seeming that it's either it's becoming more common, or maybe we're just noticing it more among people as a whole. So.
And then can you walk through the, how the basic SSRI works? What's the
Yes.
argument? Maybe you can, I don't know if you have a figure or you can draw it on the board.
I should have touched on that.
Or the Wikipedia page or something like that.
Either one. Okay. According to the all-wonderful Wikipedia, class of compounds typically used as antidepressants in treatment of depression. Increase extracellular levels of serotonin by inhibiting its reuptake in the presynaptic cell. Increasing levels of serotonin in the synaptic cleft available to bind to postsynaptic receptors. There's a varying degree of selectivity based on which SSRI you're using. Some are more specific than others. In the study or in the paper that I read about, they used Prozac specifically because it was so extremely selective for only the serotonin reuptake. Answer your question.
Have you read about anything outside of the brain, just looking at the brain, that could tie in depression, like metabolic disorders? Has anybody correlated maybe a metabolic disorder or a certain infection?
Usually, depression is a symptom of something else going on neurologically, or at least that's what all the evidence is pointing to, and it seems that anytime you see depression, there's always something else that happens. I wouldn't be able to tell you what specifically is always seen, but usually there are people who tend to be either more overweight or underweight. I mean, people can have low testosterone levels or overall out of whack endocrine system. I don't know about anything specifically about what was going on to be able to like pinpoint.
We've read some cool papers on microbiome, and so it'll be interesting to see as the research improves on the microbiome and profiling the microbiome, how metabolism or gut contents is influencing.
That's where I thought you were going with that.
I'll just note that.
I bet though you can find something that links candidate albicans to depression too.
Does it make you
Let's hope it's
depressed?
a cure. So obviously, we see that some people choose not to take their SSRIs and try to deal with it themselves. It's interesting, just pulled up the Wikipedia page, it's a non-ending list of adverse effects
Yes.
with regards to SSRIs.
And then, to me, it's kind of a giant flow chart of, what affects what. I mean, any one of these conditions could also have a side effect of depression. Obviously, we can look past suicide, but, I mean, pregnancy significantly alters the body's hormones, That would absolutely have an effect on somebody's mood. Sexual dysfunction, kind of obvious if somebody can't perform, they're probably not going to be very happy with themselves. Eating disorders is kind of back and forth, what's causing eating disorder, depression, or is the, vice versa. Obsessive compulsive disorder, schizophrenia, stuff like that, you're always usually going to find some element of depression in those patients. And it shows, I think that shows alone that depression isn't its own animal, and these, I really don't want to use the word psychoses, but when we observe these in patients, it's not always clear, cut and dry, like, oh, you have schizophrenia, you have depression, you have bipolar disorder. They're all kind of intermixed, and you usually see elements of all of them in the same patient. So, how do you treat it? Antipsychotics or antidepressants?
So I'm curious whether this could be used to increase the effectiveness of treatment in patients. If you had a patient with a decreased level of serotonin, would this be a safe way to increase the effectiveness of their Prozac? Or would you really be risking serotonin syndrome?
That's where more research needs to be done. I don't immediately want to start handing people serotonin precursors along with Prozac and risk serotonin syndrome. But definitely it seems to be an avenue of research that needs to be explored since they found such positive results on it. And who knows, maybe that'll be a big clue in, okay, well, Prozac isn't working here, try a real small amount of this, see if it improves. The other big problem with administering antidepressants to patients is they take a very long time to take effect. You have to be on them for, between 2 and 6 months for them to have a noticeable effect. And if you have somebody who's complacent about taking medication as it is, and they don't see an immediate effect, they probably just stop taking them anyway. And here I can borrow a line from Dr. Garrison and get on my proverbial soapbox of hypocrisy. And if you do have any issues, please go talk to somebody. It's not something to screw with.
Any more questions? Thank you, Josh and Mitch. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mitch.